Tamara serves as a Vice President of Sustainability at the International Fresh Produce Association with 2 decades of experience in forestry and agriculture sustainability. In her role at IFPA, she leads global sustainability initiatives for the fresh produce and floral industries, with a strong commitment on regenerative and climate-smart agriculture. Previously, she held the position of Executive Director at Great Mountain Forest, where she oversaw carbon forestry and conservation projects. She also served as a Senior Global Manager in Sustainability, concentrating on packaging, organic agriculture, and plastic management. Her background includes policy advisory work for the European Union and environmental science research at Yale University. Now let's get into the episode with Tamara. Welcome back, John.
It's great to be back, and I'm really excited for podcast 2 with Tamara.
Me as well. We're joined again today with Tamara, the Vice President of Sustainability at the International Fresh Produce Association. Welcome, Tamara.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Okay, to kick this session off, we're talking about the supply chain, but can you describe for our listeners what the fresh produce supply chain includes?
It's a fascinating supply chain that I would bet that most people do not know what it takes to bring fresh fruits and vegetables from the farm to our homes. And so it starts in a farm, and then it goes on to normally a distribution center where quality is inspected, food safety, etc. A number of attributes are inspected. Sometimes some fruits are sorted. Sometimes they're already packaged before that. Packaging is, you need to protect that fruit or that vegetable. Sometimes it doesn't need an external packaging. You add a label onto it, a little sticker that serves its purpose. I'm going to go in detail because I want to educate everyone here. And then once you have that, you put it into a truck. But just to make things more complicated, each fruit and vegetable has a very different temperature requirement. So it's a game of temperature. From the time it leaves the field until it goes to the retailer. In an ideal world, it has to be at a stable temperature. And our listeners are in Celsius, it could be like 2 degrees, it could be 10 degrees. In Fahrenheit, it could be 34 degrees, it could be 58 degrees, depends on the produce. And then it travels for hours, days, depends on the distance. And then it arrives again at a distribution center and then onto the retailer. So we have a logistical and energy intensive type of system.
Yes, it is interesting now. Now, you've touched on the fact that there's temperature control and transport and other bits in there. Energy costs appear to be rising globally. And so that must be a growing concern. So how is the fresh produce industry adapting, particularly where you've got controlled environment farming and cold chain logistics? And cold chain logistics, what we're talking about there is where refrigeration is used as some part.
Right. So that is a huge challenge for companies that do control environment agriculture, because their biggest footprint and their biggest cost is in energy. And they're working very intensely to, one, produce their own energy and also try to buy from renewable resources, and then try to keep the cost as low as possible. And then for the cold chain, this is the same story, right? You're trying to keep the cost of energy as low as possible, but it's just going up. So one topic that people don't want to hear about is that, higher energy costs, higher cost of food. And that is a reality that we live in.
Thank you. Yeah.
So before I get into what Scope 3 emissions you're tackling, I want to make sure we define that for our listeners. So Scope 3 emissions are indirect greenhouse gas emissions that come from a company's value chain that are not directly controlled by the company. So some examples of this include emissions from suppliers, product use, computing, waste disposal. So with increased attention on Scope 3 emissions, how are IFPA members working with suppliers and partners to reduce energy consumption?
So specifically for energy consumption, it's a kind of like a three-pillar system. One is reduction of energy use, so efficiencies in the system, to finding more efficiency, how to transport, how to store it, how to do the business more efficiently, number one. And then the second and third are related, are about sources of energy, whether it's direct energy sources, so it could be solar panels for those companies, etc. So they produce their own energy. And the third pillar is indirect sources of energy. So you buy from renewable energy sources or conventional energy sources. So it's kind of like a three pillar.
Yeah, I want to sort of drill down a bit more into refrigeration and transport with you. I mean, from what we've discussed, and we know this, cold storage and transportation are absolutely essential. We can't have our food supplies without them. Cold storage can be particularly carbon intensive because of you're using refrigerants, which when we were talking about greenhouse gases in our first podcast, some refrigerants have got phenomenally high global warming potentials. There's the energy used in refrigeration, and then there's the same with transport that it can be carbon intensive. So can you tell us what sort of strategies are being implemented to reduce that impact?
So in terms of logistics, there's a huge effort in improving the routes by which the transport, taking better routes, more direct, less intensive, etc. Because some go by truck, some go by ship, some go by airplane. So trying to find the best routes for that produce to go from point A to point B. In terms of refrigeration, um, um, uh, an issue with refrigerations, let's say that a ship or that truck uh, encounters some weather events or it gets delayed one day, you run the risk of losing all of that, and all of that would took to produce those goods. So very, very, very important. How our companies doing are what they're doing is trying to, again, is improve efficiencies. That's where the focus is right now. And there's still, what I hear is that from them is that there's still quite a bit of room for improvement in terms of efficiencies in reducing the footprint of refrigeration and the whole transport in general.
Thank you.
To expand on that, Tamara, can you tell us some emerging energy efficiency technologies that are being adopted across the supply chain from the greenhouse operations to cold storage?
So one is, as I said, routes, more efficient routes, just how it goes from point A to point B in a better way. And then there's strategies vary by company. It could be about focus, if it's on trucks, it could be about electric trucks. It could be about more fuel efficient trucks, etc. If it's by ship, then you contract a ship, right? And then so it's with that contract company or by plane. So then when you contract with that company, how efficient they are with but that becomes really, really very far scope 3 that you have a less control over. Trucks are more easy to control. Most companies own them or contract them directly. Ships and planes are less easy to control because they're bigger companies that are transporting many other goods besides yours. So that's where it gets a bit more complex. It gets more complex with ships and airplanes.
I would imagine. Can you share some examples of IFPA members who have successfully reduced their carbon footprint for our listeners?
That's a question that I often get, and it's so broad. It's very difficult for me to answer, and Joe knows why, because sustainability is so complex. Like, how do you know how successful you have been? We would have to have identical metrics throughout the supply chain. Do we have that, John? No, exactly. So if we don't have the same metrics, how do we know who's, quote unquote, winning that race or not, right? So that is extremely difficult to quantify. Another of those questions, like, with a really difficult answer. What I can say is that there are many companies in our membership that are extremely devoted to sustainability, looking at it in every angle. Are they winning every challenge right away? I'm not sure. It depends. This is very organic, no pun intended, over time. But I can say that, yes, there are companies that are so focused on sustainability and improving sustainability on every aspect, whether it's farming, whether it's logistics, energy, you name it, packaging. So we have some great examples out there.
Okay, I'm going to ask you what I might call a knotty question. I want to touch on policy and reporting. And, we're in an environment now where we used to have corporate social responsibility. We now have environment, society and governance, ESG reporting. Right. And we're seeing many jurisdictions, not all, but many jurisdictions are requiring more and more mandatory reporting in sustainability issues. And so I've got a two-part question is, how is the IFPA supporting its members in navigating regulations? And also, how do you help your members in terms of things like carbon pricing and carbon trading?
All good questions. Let me start. So just to, because we have to have some fun, right, in these conversations, and, add some some difficult topics. So I would say most sustainability professionals would tell you that ESG is the enemy of sustainability because it means nothing. It just means environment, social, and governance. It doesn't talk about journeys. It doesn't talk about where you're going. It just tells you, take a picture in time. And that means very little. So I'm just going to be a little controversial there.
Look, that's a good piece of controversy. It.
Yeah. So many, I've been to many conferences where, people have said, can we stop saying ESG for once and for all? And that it becomes reporting. Reporting has become the vein of sustainability. And unfortunately, I think we're at a point that companies are spending more time in reporting than actually doing.
Yeah.
And we don't want, and IFP is very clear on this. We don't want reporting to get on the way of actually doing good sustainability, because in the end, it's about energy, people. Like, how many people do you have in a team, and how is that team spending their time? If they're spending their whole time reporting, they're not spending it in creating goals, milestones, and putting that energy into finding efficiencies for the company. And so what IFPA is doing are, trying to, right now, I spend more of my time that I wish I were on helping industry with the whole reporting aspect. So reporting goes in two ways. One is to governments, and the other is to the market, normally to buyers. In the EU is more to the government, in the US is more to buyers, but in the end it's all reporting, right? And so, or it could be financial institutions, etc. And so right now I am, I devote quite of my time, and IFPA devotes quite of its time in informing our membership on how to report, but also in improving the reporting process. One thing that I'm working very heavily with is right now there's a little bit of a not ideal world between producers and buyers when it comes to reporting. So farmers and retailers have their own requirements, and farmers have to report to a myriad of retailers. So right now we're working on trying to streamline those processes. I'm working with the Consumer Goods Forum, which is a global body that is trying to benchmark sustainability standards, so the retailers will be able to have a more streamlined process for sustainability requirements. So that's one example.
That is really interesting. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for another great episode, Tamara. To end off this episode, what is the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
What is the biggest takeaway for the listeners? I think that one, it's the supply chain for fruits and vegetables is complex, and there are many strategies that companies are working towards improving that supply chain and making it more environmentally friendly. It could be renewable energy, could be many other strategies. Another takeaway is that ESG is not a goal. ESG is a picture in time. Sustainability is a journey. It's a continuous improvement journey. It's much more powerful, much more inspirational to have a sustainability journey than just count your ESGs and have a report.
Thanks for that. John, what's your biggest takeaway?
I've got two. One's the soft one, and the other one links to Tamara's sort of controversial one. But there has to be an element of self-interest in growers in sustainability, because if we don't have a sustainable planet, you can't continue to grow, and therefore we survive as a human race. So there's a given there. But I love your courage in coming out and saying that ESG is the enemy of sustainability. And when that's first said, you can imagine people going, what? But I can speak to the fact I've supported a number of large organisations in their ESG reporting, and the resource that is required just to do that, and they literally finish one cycle of ESG reporting, and then the 10, 20 people involved in it start all over again, and none of that is actually delivering change. It's providing metrics and figures to stakeholders who don't necessarily understand it all, and you wonder where it's all going. But the danger is, what I worry about is, we do need to have good metrics. We need to have transparent reporting, but we need something that is more fit for purpose than where ESG is going at the moment. So yeah, I like that.
I would say that's my biggest takeaway, is kind of on the same note of the need for balance between reporting and action, right? You need something for a journey, something to measure success. You need data. You really do. That's the only way to measure how far you've come. But I do think with the bureaucracy of certain things, we tend to forget about what we're actually trying to accomplish, and we focus a little too much on the reports. And so I do think, Tamara, that was a really refreshing take.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh.
We like a little bit of controversy in these podcasts.
Yes, why not? We have to have fun in these conversations, you know?
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, the whole purpose of our podcast series is not to provide a platform for any one view, but to provide to hopefully the people who listen to us become better informed, ask better questions, understand things. And I think actually something like saying, well, is ESG really worth it? I think it's a brilliant question.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Tamara, John, thank you for another great episode.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360 Energy Inc. Tune in to our podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Anchor, or other listening platforms by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. Email us your feedback at podcast@360energy.net or comment on our LinkedIn posts. See you next week.